back to CTN. I'm your host, Robert Van Sluten. This episode, I'm going to talk about alerts and action sheets. Let's get started. I have an application here called Alerts that we're going to use to explore alerts and action sheets. Let's go ahead and run this. I immediately get an action sheet that says, would you like to go boating today? And I have some choices here. Sailing would be great, prefer power boating, or not today. If I say not today, just simply tell me okay, and I have the ability to rerun this with a button. Let's say if I choose sailing, it's going to check the weather and give me a warning. Rain is forecast. Well, if I want to cancel the trip because of that, we will stay home. Let's say I want to go power boating, and I'll go anyway. Rain is forecast. It always will say rain is forecast. Meet you at the dock. Let's start talking about the code. Okay, before we dig into the code that actually manages the alert and the action sheet, I want to bring up something about view controllers. The method that you get when the view controller is created, view did load, this one here, is called after the view hierarchy for the view controller is in memory. However, that has not been attached to a super view. In this case, the single view has not been attached to the window as a subview. So at that point, it's not being displayed. So that also means that it's not possible to create the action sheet on the screen. Later on in the life cycle of the view controller, there's a method view did appear. Now at that point, the view is attached to a hierarchy, in this case, the window. Now, views have a property that is the window. In other words, if they're in window, in other words, if they're in view, the view.window is not nil. I have a log statement in the view did load, and I have a log statement in the view did appear that puts the value of view.window in the console. And if you look down at the console here, you'll notice the first time it's invoked, well, window is nil. The next time it has a value, it has an address, and it has a whole bunch of parameter values. So as a result, I added the method, or I overloaded the method, view overrid the method, view did appear. I got to call super. I do the log, and then I do a self.run. We'll talk about that coming up very shortly when we start talking about how this thing is actually constructed. The other thing I'd like to mention is there is a label that displays the text more or less in the center of the screen. There's a property to that, and it's just simply called label. There's also a rerun button at the bottom of the screen that enables me to run the whole process over again. When that button is pushed, there's an action. Buttons are the simplest possible control you can have, but I also have a property to it because there's certain times during the process of running this that I hide that button and actually disappears. That's actually the case when the alert is displayed. Now you may wonder we're in a .m, which you would normally consider implementation, and we have this interface statement that we've been putting things under, followed by parentheses. Now, what this is indicating to the compiler that this is an interface extension. In other words, things in here are above and beyond what's in the header. Now, that's very convenient in the sense that these properties are never visible to anybody. They're not in the .h. Users of the class don't see them, and it hides the design. Let's go to the next slide, and we'll start talking about the other parts of the code. Okay, I'm now in the ViewController.h file. And keep in mind we have two UIKit classes of interest. We have UIAlertView and UIActionSheet. Both of those have a delegate, which we're going to conform to in ViewController. So we have UIAlertView delegate and UIActionSheet delegate. Now, I want to make a point about UIKit in general. It's a very rich environment in terms of the amount of methods and properties that are provided and the flexibility. In some ways, almost too rich. In general, most of the time, you end up using the simplest mechanisms, and that's what we tend to do in CTN. As a general recommendation, though, if you're going to use a class, I'd go and actually completely read the class reference twice before starting your program. You'll more fully understand what's actually going on, and you may find something in there that directly addresses your particular specific need. Let's go over to the .m and start digging into the code. UIAlertView and UIActionView are very similar. Basically, both of them have lengthy initializers to actually create them. I have a action which is triggered by the button called Run. The first thing I do is I clear out the label. So in other words, I take away the text. Then I go ahead and I create an action sheet with an alloc, and I call this initializer. It basically wants some text. And this is the question: would you like to go boating today? And a delegate. In other words, what object is going to get contacted after one of the buttons is pushed? And it's self. That's the normal case. Now there's two specialized buttons, and this really has to do with how they appear, the background. I only use the cancel button and I say, no, not today. The other one I don't use. Destruction button, title. And then I have two additional buttons, which are an array, essentially. This is a multi-argument, off the top of my head, I don't know what. It's the same sort of thing you end up with the formatted string. So I got multiple strings here. Sailing would be great, and prefer power boating, and that's terminated with a nil. Now I've created the thing, and I actually want to display it. So I do a show in view, and the view I want to show it in is self.view, which is the ViewController's view. Now, up where after the view appears, I do a self run. So I'm actually calling an action. Well, that's kind of strange, but actions really just are nothing more than methods. So this is actually perfectly valid. The run will actually get called from the tap of the button and will also get invoked from up here. Now the question becomes, what happens when you actually make one of these selections and the thing is dismissed? Well, through delegation, this method here gets called, and the primary thing is the button index. In other words, which button got tapped on the action sheet. Turns out 0 and 1 are the two voting buttons, and the default, in other words, there was a tap outside on the background or on the don't want to go today. If it is the case of going button, I go ahead and I do an alert. This is where the whole weather thing comes in. This is similar init, except it has a title and a message. Rain is forecast today. The delegate is self. And there's a cancel trip button or a other button of go anyway. Could be a list, you could have more. To actually display this, it's a little bit simpler. You just simply say show. Now, there is this button for hiding, or the button for rerunning. Actually, when I'm displaying this alert, I hide that button. So that's what this self.button.hidden equals yes is. I could have done a enable equals no. That would have been another way of doing that. That's a control property. This one's a view property. Of course, if we're not going, I just say OK. Now, what happens in terms of the alert? The same sort of thing. There's a protocol method, and we are the delegate for the alert. And the two buttons are 0 and 1 in that case, and so we're going to stay home. We want to cancel the trip, or we meet at the dock. And before the method returns, self.button hidden equals no. That's it. This project will be on the website, cocotouchnetcast.com. And as usual, there's a contact link there, or you could add comments to YouTube, or you can write a review in iTunes, if that's where you're watching from. I would like to take the opportunity to make a minor correction on an earlier episode. In the singleton episode, I referred to the UI accelerometer as being a singleton. That thing has been moved, or the equivalent of it has been moved into core motion. So that class is basically defunct. Thanks for watching.